Please be seated. I have props today. There's a funny story about these props. Ask me about it sometime. There's a couple things I want to address in these readings today before I really start into my sermon. And you guys can all roll your eyes because I'm a long preacher. I know that. I'll try and get to the point. When we heard this story in Peter, and Peter says that it was the Jews that killed Jesus, this has been used as a tool for a lot of anti-Semitism, and that's not good. And the reason why is that the true understanding of this is that Peter and John, who is the writer of the Gospel of John, and Peter, who is the writer of this letter, are talking to an inside group. It's an intertension among the family members. I think we all can relate to this idea that I can say something about my daughter, but don't you dare. Even if I know it's true, even if I think the same thing, you do not have that right. And so this group of faithful followers of Jesus within the Jewish community are trying to make sense of this. And so one of the conclusions is that the religious elite had a part in it. And the truth is they're right. But also the Romans, or the Gentiles, which in that language is everybody else that isn't Jewish, also had a part in it. So what that means is we all have a part in it. We all can be like every character written in these stories. So if we're honest with each other, we all know that we need redeeming. And that's why Jesus came, to redeem us all. That's the good news. So that was one thing I wanted to make sure that I clarified. And the other thing I needed to clarify in this is there was a mistake in this bulletin because this is not a reading from the first letter of Paul to Peter. And I don't know how many people caught that. But Paul didn't write to Peter. So, and actually, I got to be honest, I'm not even sure which letter this goes to because I depend on this. But it's probably the Corinthians because there's 2 letters to them, or yada, yada, yada. You get it. This is why I'm a long preacher. Anyway, what I really want to talk about today is I want to talk about being baptized into a community. I want to talk about Jesus being in that upper room and the disciples being so afraid. And we take, the whole story, it's just sort of massaged into being less than it really is. But these men and women in the upper room have the door locked because they are afraid for their lives. Their leader was just crucified, which is the most gruesome, horrific death anyone can have. They're afraid. What does Jesus do? He comes in and he says, "Peace be with you." It's like a mother coming over to you when you're having a nightmare and says, "It's okay," because that nightmare feels real. For anyone who understands night terrors, it feels real. It feels calming. It feels like all is right with the world. So that's the first thing Jesus came. And there's one of them who isn't there, and it's Thomas. And so Jesus comes the next week or the next period of time, comes back, and what does he say again? Peace be with you. So in our community, one of the things that we should be reaching for more than anything else is peace. But not just placating, not just sort of condescending agreement, a true sense of unity in a purpose together, that all other things fade away because we are all centered on this one idea that gives us this peace. And what is that idea? Love. That we will search and find love. There's always a way that is going to benefit one part of the group and another way that's going to benefit a different part of the group. There's always thesis and antithesis. But folks, there is always synthesis. There's always another way. And spiritually speaking, that other way is Jesus. So we come together in baptism because we want a piece of that peace. We want to know what it's like to have a tangible idea of who God is. We talked about in both groups where we can't know God. I can't tell you definitively. We tried to draw God. What happened? It didn't go well. And the funny thing was, when we tried to draw it, Olivia was like, I don't understand what God looks like any better now than when we started. Because we can't know. But we can know some things about God, right? So Olivia, what did you have? What were some characteristics you had on that paper? Love. So we had hearts. Eyes. Jesus sees everything. Ears, because he hears. He listens for our calls. He sees when we're in trouble and he's there with us, right? Great job. Thanks. Tally, when we talked about it, did I use a magnet? Yes. Metaphor? Come on up. Okay, this is the silly thing. I got magnets that were so strong the first time we're in the store, and I'm like, I got to get the biggest ones. And Dave, some of you know him. He's like, Mary, you don't need the biggest one. Oh, yes, I do. So I tested it in the car, and they wouldn't come apart. So I had to exchange them because that's me and that's Dave.
Still worth it, though.
Yes. And you know what's so funny? I was standing there. How many people are like this? I was standing there, and I knew that 90-pound magnet was too much. These are 65. I knew it, but I was still tempted, and I was thinking maybe if I just got 190 and 165. That's temptation, because I got to go big. All right, so what did we say about these magnets?
That one side, if you flip it over, they won't come together, but one side, if you're like this, and one of the other sides just...
It snaps, right? She heard. Yay! All right, so watch this. Can you see? This is why I wanted the big ones. Can you all trust me that they don't let it go, right? There's force in it that won't let them touch, right? But watch this. Move, hold that, and move it just a teeny bit towards mine. Just push it like that. And you see how fast? It is the littlest amount. Can I show? So look, it doesn't go this way, But if this one turns just the littlest bit, it just pulls it in. And this is an example of God's force, right? These were hard too. Oh my gosh. All right, I can use it this way. So, who else? Wait. Well, no, it's okay. But Jamie and Christopher, look at, this is the force of God's love. Isn't that crazy? It's a metaphor, right? But it's true. It's really true. Is it not? Can I get an amen? Amen, right? It is true. God's force is so strong that if you let it and you turn the slightest bit to God, whoosh, you are there, right? Some of us have felt it. Some of us have been there, right? Here's the other piece. These are the nails. Do you know where I'm going with this? Yeah, right? But this is pretty cool, right? So, this is God and the force of good, all collected together. Sorry, guys, but these little nails are us, the Christians, right? We got a little head. Watch this. But that was pretty predictable, right? But watch. But look at the nails on the bottom. They're not touching the force. But the community of the nails are bringing others along. You see that? Look at how far it can go. And watch. Sometimes all it takes is one person to lead the others to this amazing power of God. It's crazy, isn't it? But it's such a great visual. And look how messy it is. We're pretty messy, aren't we? Christian communities are pretty messy. Some of us are on our heads and some are on our feet. But look, we can keep picking people up more and more. That is the power of God. And that is God's will for us, to be drawn in. And so, the other thing we really talked about was the difference between belief and trust, right? Believing is believing that you shouldn't do something, like take the candy. This is what I learned. You shouldn't take the candy because God doesn't want you to. Because it's bad. And because it's not good. Is that the premise most of us live our lives on? We do things or we don't because God will either be pleased or not. But trusting is a big, huge step over that line, right? Trusting is when you want to take that candy, saying to yourself, I bet if I don't take that candy and I ask God to be with me, that I'll get something better later. And it happened to Olivia. She didn't take the candy, went for ice cream. Did I make that up? Did that happen? Oh, it happened. I love her. She gets metaphor. But, right? If we say, it's not right for me to take the candy because the rule says I can't, and it's not about taking the candy, but it's about being honest and following your parents, listening to what they say. And so you say, I'm not going to do that. But most parents I know like candy too. And eventually we'll take kids to the candy store and say, pick out what you'd like. But it happens in everyone's life constantly. Because God does better for us than what we can ever imagine. Always. That's what spiritual hope is about. Because when those disciples were gathered in that room and were afraid, all they could imagine they could imagine being hurt like Jesus was. But they were faithful, they stayed together. And God showed up. Jesus came in and gave them the greatest gift he could have. He had already given them love, and now he gave them peace. So, as Jesus said, peace be with you always.